plastic bag washes up on a South Korean beach. It's torn, cheap, the kind of thing anyone else would throw away. But someone in North Korea couldn't. So they took a needle and thread and they stitched it back together, stitch by stitch, just to keep using it. That bag is now sitting in a researcher's office in South Korea because it says more about North Korea than any missile test ever could. While the regime launches nuclear-capable weapons and holds military parades in Beijing, its own people are mending garbage just to survive. And that's the story nobody wants to tell you properly. Because North Korea isn't just weird. It isn't just Kim Jong Un memes and goose-stepping soldiers. It is, by every measure the United Nations can produce, one of the most systematically repressive states that has ever existed. And in 2026, it's getting worse, not better. This is what's actually happening inside North Korea right now. Let's start with the part of this story most people vaguely know exists, but have never actually had explained to them, the Kwanliso. These are North Korea's political prison camps, and as of 2026, at least 4 of them are still fully operational, the largest being Hwasong, a facility so big it's measured in hundreds of square kilometers. Human rights researchers estimate somewhere between 80,000 and 120,000 people are held inside these camps right now. Not for crimes in any sense you'd recognize, for being related to someone the regime doesn't like. North Korea runs on a doctrine called guilt by association. If your grandfather did something the state considered disloyal, you can be born into a labor camp for a crime committed before you existed. 3 generations, punished collectively for one act. Inside, prisoners are forced into mining, logging, and farming operations under conditions survivors have compared to Stalin's gulags. And some former inmates go further, describing them as extermination through labor and starvation. People are worked, starved, and left to die, and when they die, nobody outside ever finds out their name. Satellite imagery, the only real window the outside world has into these places, has repeatedly shown new housing blocks and expanding industrial zones, meaning these facilities aren't shrinking, they're growing. This is not a historical atrocity we're describing. This is happening today while you watch this video. Here's the part that should genuinely disturb you. You could be executed in North Korea for what's on your phone. Since 2020, North Korea's anti-reactionary thought law has made it a capital offense to access foreign media. And increasingly, the regime is targeting young people specifically, because they're the ones most likely to have found a way around the information blackout. Human Rights Watch has documented testimony from escapees describing tech-savvy young people being specifically surveilled and targeted. One defector described witnessing the public execution of a 22-year-old man for the crime of listening to South Korean songs and sharing foreign media with friends. Not smuggling weapons, not organizing resistance, listening to music. Owning a Bible can get you sent to a labor camp for life. Watching a Korean drama can get your entire family reclassified as politically unreliable, which follows them for generations through North Korea's Songbun system, a caste structure that decides where you're allowed to live, what job you're allowed to have, and who you're allowed to marry, based entirely on your family's perceived loyalty to the regime. This is a country that has criminalized curiosity itself. Now here's where this stops being a story about the past and becomes a story about right now. This year, in an active war, most of your recommended feed still isn't covering properly. North Korea has sent thousands of its own soldiers to fight for Russia in Ukraine. And what's coming out of that battlefield is horrifying even by North Korean standards. In January, Ukraine released footage of 2 captured North Korean soldiers. Ukrainian special forces and South Korean intelligence reported something chilling. Injured North Korean soldiers were sometimes executed by their own units, rather than risk them being captured. Soldiers have reportedly been instructed to take their own lives instead of surrendering. And the North Korean state media didn't hide this. It glorified it, presenting forced suicide as heroic sacrifice, reinforcing to every soldier watching that surrender equals treason, and that their families back home will pay the price if they don't die first. Meanwhile, Kim Jong Un was in Beijing in September, standing next to Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin at a military parade, projecting strength to the entire world. The soldiers dying in trenches in a foreign war don't get a parade, they get erased. While North Korea poured resources into weapons development and expanding its military footprint abroad, ordinary people back home were doing something you rarely see reported. They were mending plastic bags to survive. South Korea's central bank estimated the average North Korean's yearly income in 2024 was around $1,246. That's not a monthly wage. That's the entire year, placing North Korea firmly in the World Bank's low-income category, on par with some of the poorest nations on Earth. And yet, the government continued prioritizing public spending on weapons over food, healthcare, or basic infrastructure for its own citizens. The United Nations Human Rights Commissioner didn't mince words about this in May 2026, calling it a human rights crisis and specifically criticizing what he called the extreme prioritization of security and military spending at the expense of desperately needed social services. International humanitarian staff still aren't allowed back into the country. Private trade has almost completely collapsed. Hospitals are reported to be running without basic medicine or equipment. This is a government that would rather its people go hungry than let a single outside aid worker see what's actually happening inside its borders. In March 2026, something notable happened at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. A resolution condemning North Korea's systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations was adopted, and for the first time in years, South Korea itself signed on as a co-sponsor. That decision actually sparked real political debate inside South Korea, where some worried it could damage prospects for diplomacy with the North. But human rights groups pushed back hard, arguing that calling on a government to stop committing crimes against humanity isn't a diplomatic favor. It's a baseline legal obligation North Korea already agreed to when it joined the UN. North Korea's response? Its foreign ministry called the resolution a grave political provocation and a fraud document, accusing the West of using human rights as a weapon. But the UN's own decade-long review, published in September 2025, found something the regime can't spin away: an expanded use of the death penalty, increased repression, and deepened isolation since 2020, meaning things have gotten measurably worse under Kim Jong Un, not better, even as the world's attention has drifted toward other crises. So when people say North Korea is just a weird country with a wacky dictator, understand what that framing actually hides. It hides a prison camp system holding well over 80,000 people for crimes they never committed. It hides teenagers executed for listening to music. It hides soldiers ordered to kill themselves rather than surrender in a war that has nothing to do with their own country. It hides a population earning barely over $1,000 a year, while their government builds submarines and marches in parades in Beijing. The stitched plastic bag isn't a quirky story. It's a message from people who have no other way of sending one. If this is the first time you're seeing the full picture, that's exactly the point. Subscribe, because we're going to keep covering the stories the algorithm doesn't want you to see.